47 seconds. That's how long Thailand Graves had left before her heart would stop beating in the negative 12-degree cold of the Colorado Rockies. The Moonstone Ridge Pack believed that sacrificing an innocent soul would break the curse that had plagued them for a decade. No children born, crops rotting in the fields, deer fleeing to warmer valleys. They were wrong about many things that winter night. Wrong about the curse, wrong about the demon in the woods, and catastrophically wrong about the girl they chained to the stone. The creature lurking in the shadows of the forbidden woods wasn't the mindless beast they feared. He was Caspian Blackwood, the true Alpha King that the pack had betrayed and buried alive 10 years ago. And tonight the sacrifice they'd offered him wouldn't become his meal. She would become his weapon. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Every reckoning has a beginning. And Thalen's began 3 days earlier in the suffocating confines of the pack house basement where she'd spent the last 10 years of her life. The water was ice cold when it hit the stone floor. Thalen had been scrubbing that same spot for 20 minutes, her knees raw against the rough concrete, her fingers pruned and aching. She'd learned long ago to make herself small, invisible, silent. At 23 years old, she'd perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. The bucket had been full. Now it was empty, its contents spreading across the freshly cleaned floor in a mockery of her work. Standing above her hand, still extended from kicking the bucket over, Serafina Thornfield smiled. It was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, the kind that promised cruelty. "Oops," Serafina said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. At 24, the Alpha's daughter had never scrubbed a floor in her life, never missed a meal, never wondered if she mattered to anyone. "Looks like you missed a spot. Actually, you missed all the spots. Do it again." Thalen didn't look up. "Yes, Miss Serafina." "And Thalen," the voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and venomous. "I saw you looking at Garrett yesterday, at the training grounds. You think someone like him would ever want someone like you? You're nothing. You're not even Omega. You're just trash we let live here out of mercy." The words landed like physical blows, but Thalen's face remained carefully blank. She'd learned that too. How to take the hits without flinching. How to swallow the pain until it became just another stone in the pit of her stomach where hope used to live. Serafina's heels clicked away up the stone stairs, each tap echoing in the basement like a countdown. Only when the door slammed did Thalen allow herself to breathe. She sat back on her heels, looking at the spilled water at her red and cracked hands at the 23 years of her life that had somehow shrunk to fit in this basement. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears somewhere around year 5. Instead, she reached for the mop and began again. Because that's what you did when you were nothing and no one. You began again and again and again. Until one day you couldn't anymore. The Moonstone Ridge Pack House stood like a monument to old wealth and older cruelty. Built from Colorado stone and timber harvested from the surrounding forest, it had housed the pack's leadership for over 300 years. 12 generations of alphas had ruled from its great hall. 12 generations of wolves had been born, lived, and died under its protection. But for the last 10 years, something had been rotting at its core. Thalen moved through the halls like a ghost, carrying stacks of linens that blocked her view, navigating by memory and instinct. She knew every creaking board, every cold draft, every shadow. The pack house was a maze to visitors, but to her it was a prison she'd memorized inch by inch. 127 meals per week, 14 bathrooms to scrub, 43 beds to make, 26 fireplaces to clean, laundry for 200 pack members, all for $0, zero thanks, and zero hope of anything changing. The pack members who passed her in the halls didn't see her. Not really. She was part of the architecture as unremarkable as the walls. The young wolves in training laughed and jostled each other, never noticing when they bumped into her, sending her carefully balanced loads tumbling. The mothers shepherded their children past without a glance. The warriors talked strategy and territory, their voices carrying the casual confidence of those who'd never questioned their place in the world. Thalen had been 13 when her parents died. Samuel and Mary Graves, the pack's Gamma Third in command, loyal to the bone dead in what everyone called an unfortunate accident. A car crash on a mountain road. Brake failure. Tragic. The pack had mourned for exactly 1 week, then moved on with the practical efficiency of wolves who understood that life was hard and death was certain. No one had wanted to take in the Gamma's orphaned daughter. Magnus Thornfield, the alpha who'd risen to power that same year, had generously offered her a place in the pack house. Not as a member of the pack, not exactly. More as help. Someone had to do the work after all. And an orphan with no one to advocate for her, no family to demand better treatment. Well, that was convenient, wasn't it? 10 years. 3,650 days. 87,600 hours. Every one of them in service to people who saw her as less than nothing. But Thalen saw things too. When you're invisible, people forget you have eyes. They forget you have ears. They say things, do things, assume you're too stupid or too broken to understand what you're witnessing. She'd learned to notice patterns. The way Magnus's jaw tightened when Elder Harding asked about the sacred burial grounds. The way Serafina would return from trips to Denver wearing jewelry that seemed too expensive even for an alpha's daughter. The way supplies had been dwindling year after year while Magnus somehow grew wealthier. The way the pack's territory had been shrinking parcels of land mysteriously sold off to human corporations. And 3 days ago, she'd heard something that made all those patterns snap into focus. It had been late afternoon. Thalen had been cleaning the third-floor hallway which ran past Magnus's private office. The alpha didn't usually work this late, but she'd heard voices and frozen mop in hand, instinct screaming at her to be silent, be still, be invisible. Magnus's voice had carried through the thick oak door loud with the kind of confidence that came from believing you were untouchable. He was on the phone. She shouldn't have listened, but her feet wouldn't move. The deal is 50 million cash. Wire transfer to the offshore account the day I sign. Redstone Mining gets full rights to the sacred burial grounds, all 400 acres. You can start excavation the day after winter solstice. A pause. Thalen's heart had been hammering so hard she was sure someone would hear it. No, the pack doesn't know. They think we're signing a partnership for hunting rights or some bullshit. By the time they figure out what I've actually sold, I'll be in the Caymans. Let them deal with the fallout. Another pause, then a laugh. Cold. Cruel. Nothing like the benevolent alpha he pretended to be in public. The burial grounds, they're dead wolves for Christ's sake. They don't care. And the living wolves will be too busy starving to complain once I'm gone. The curse bullshit I've been feeding them for years. No children, failing crops. That's just preparation. After I disappear, they'll be so desperate they'll accept any explanation. Disease, divine punishment, whatever. Not my problem anymore. Thalen had stood there, mop dripping onto the expensive rug, mind racing. The sacred burial grounds weren't just pack property, they were holy ground. 12 generations of wolves rested there, their spirits tied to the land protecting the territory. Selling them for mining was sacrilege. It would destroy the pack's connection to their ancestors, sever the spiritual bonds that made them more than just animals pretending to be human. And Magnus was going to do it. He was going to betray 300 years of history for $50 million and a beach house in the Caribbean. She'd finished cleaning that hallway in a daze, moving on autopilot while her mind spun. She should tell someone. But who? Who would believe the pack house servant over their alpha? Who would even listen long enough to hear her out? The answer was no one. She was nothing. Her words meant nothing. Her knowledge meant nothing. But she'd filed it away, that conversation, added it to all the other observations, all the other patterns, not knowing that in 3 days it would be the difference between dying meaningless and dying with purpose. Though as it turned out, she wouldn't be dying at all. The pack meeting was called for sunset on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the longest the night. In wolf culture, the solstice had always been sacred, a time for renewal, for reflection, for community. But there was nothing sacred about the energy in the great hall as 200 pack members filed in their faces, tight with worry and fear. Thalen wasn't supposed to attend. She was serving as always, moving along the edges of the room with trays of drinks, refilling glasses, clearing empty plates. Invisible. But tonight, for the first time in 10 years, she was grateful for that invisibility. It meant she could watch, could listen, could see the trap closing before anyone else realized it was there. Magnus stood on the raised platform at the hall's front, flanked by his Beta Garrett Holloway and his daughter Serafina. He looked every inch, the alpha tall, broad-shouldered silver threaded through his dark hair in a way that suggested wisdom rather than age. His expression was grave concern, the perfect mask of a leader facing a crisis with his people. My pack, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. My family. I've called you here tonight because we face a truth that can no longer be ignored. For 10 years, we have suffered under a curse. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew what he was talking about. The decade of decline that had turned Moonstone Ridge from one of the most prosperous packs in Colorado to one barely holding on. 10 years since a child was born to our pack. 10 years of crops failing in fields that once fed us through the harshest winters. 10 years of watching the deer herds migrate south, leaving our hunters empty-handed. 10 years of watching our territory shrink, our wealth diminish, our strength fade. He paused, letting the words sink in. Thalin watched faces in the crowd, saw fear, saw resignation, saw the desperate hope that their alpha would have a solution. The elders and I have consulted the old texts. We have sought guidance from the moon goddess herself, and we found the source of our suffering. Magnus's voice dropped, taking on a tone of reluctant revelation. 10 years ago, when I took the alpha position after the previous alphas, unfortunate madness and death, something went wrong with the succession. The spirits of our ancestors resting in the sacred burial grounds were not properly appeased. They have turned their faces from us. The land itself rejects our presence. More murmurs, louder now. Some wolves were nodding. Others looked skeptical, but they were in the minority. When you were desperate enough, you'd believe anything that promised relief. There is a ritual, Magnus continued. An old one, older than our pack, older than the laws we live by now. A ritual of atonement, to cleanse the spiritual debt, to restore balance between the living and the dead. We must offer a pure soul, a sacrifice to the cursed wolf of the north, the demon that haunts the forbidden woods. Thalin's blood went cold. She knew what was coming. Somehow in the pit of her stomach, where all her worst fears lived, she knew. The sacrifice must be innocent, unbonded. Someone with no family to mourn them, no maid to contest the ritual. Someone whose death would cause minimal disruption to the pack's structure. Every word was a nail in a coffin Thalin could now see clearly. Magnus wasn't describing qualifications. He was describing her. The elders and I have made our choice. Magnus's gaze swept the room and landed for just a moment on Thalin standing against the back wall with an empty tray. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Thalin Graves, step forward. The room went silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned to find her. And for the first time in 10 years, Thalin was not invisible. She was seen. She was named. She was chosen. She was dead. Thalin's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying her through the parting crowd toward the platform. Faces blurred past her. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked relieved. Better her than them. Better the orphan no one wanted than someone with a family. Someone who mattered. No. The word came out barely above a whisper. Thalin cleared her throat, tried again. No, Alpha Magnus, I haven't done anything wrong. I have served the pack faithfully for 10 years. I don't deserve. Serafina laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. You think this is about what you deserve? This is about what the pack needs, and the pack needs someone to die. Congratulations, you finally get to be useful. Thalin turned to the crowd, desperate now. Please, someone. Elder Harding, you knew my parents. They served this pack with honor. Would they want this? Would they want their daughter sacrificed for a curse that... She stopped. She'd been about to say doesn't exist. About to reveal what she'd overheard about Magnus's plans about the mining deal. But the words died in her throat as she saw Elder Harding's face. He looked away, wouldn't meet her gaze. No one would meet her gaze. The decision is made, Magnus said, his voice hard, now brooking no argument. Garrett restrained her. Garrett Holloway stepped forward. 28 years old, beta of the pack, the boy who used to pull Thalin's braids when they were children. The teenager who'd promised at 17 that he'd always protect her. The man who'd gotten his promotion to beta 2 years ago and had stopped seeing her entirely. He pulled silver chains from his jacket. Real silver, the kind that burned wolf skin. The kind used for prisoners and traitors. Garrett, Thalin whispered as he approached, please, you know this is wrong. You know the legends about the cursed wolf are just stories to scare children. There's no demon in the woods. This is murder. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Garrett's eyes. Doubt, shame, the ghost of the boy who'd once been kind. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold practicality of a man who'd made his choice. The pack is starving Thalin, he said quietly, fastening the chains around her wrists. The silver burned, she gasped. The children are crying from hunger. The crops are dead. The deer are gone. If Alpha Magnus says this will save us, then it will save us. Better you than my family. Better you than me. That's what he really meant. That's what they all meant. The chains tightened. Garrett didn't look at her as he led her toward the door. The crowd parted again, and this time Thalin heard it clearly, the sound of relief. Sighs, whispers. Thank the goddess. At least it's over. Poor thing, but it's for the best. Poor thing, as if she were already dead and they were mourning. As if her life was already over and this was just a formality. Magnus followed behind them, playing his part perfectly, the reluctant alpha making hard choices for his people. You're doing a noble thing, Thalin. Your sacrifice will be remembered. Your name will be honored. Lies. All lies. Her name would be forgotten within a year, within a month, within a week. She would become a cautionary tale, nothing more. The girl who died for the pack, the sacrifice that saved them all. Except she wasn't saving anyone. She was just convenient. The procession to the altar of atonement took 30 minutes. The entire pack walked carrying torches against the encroaching dark. It would have been beautiful in other circumstances, 200 people moving through the snow-covered forest flames, dancing against the night breath, misting in the cold. A ceremony, a ritual, but Thalin couldn't see the beauty. She could only see the death march for what it was. They reached the boundary of the forbidden woods as the last light faded from the sky. The altar was a massive slab of granite, ancient and weathered, stained with rust-colored memories of older, darker times. It marked the edge of pack territory, the line between civilization and wilderness. Beyond it, the trees grew thick and black, tangled together so densely that the forest looked like a solid wall. Somewhere in those woods, according to legend, lived the cursed wolf. A demon, a monster, a creature that had once been alpha and had gone mad with power, slaughtering its own pack before fleeing into the wilderness. The story said it was huge as a horse, with fur black as moonless midnight, and eyes that glowed violet with unholy light. It ate those who wandered too close to its territory. It could smell fear from miles away. It was death incarnate. Thalin had never believed the stories. Wolves didn't go mad like that. Alphas didn't turn into demons. The cursed wolf was propaganda, a cautionary tale to keep young wolves from exploring too far into dangerous territory. But standing here now, staring into that wall of blackness, with the temperature dropping and her breath crystallizing in the air, she wondered if maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe there was something in those woods. Maybe she was about to meet it. Garrett lifted her onto the altar. The stone was ice against her back, even through the thin white shift they dressed her in. Ceremonial clothing, sacrificial clothing. She might as well have been naked for all the warmth it provided. He fastened the chains to iron bolts set deep in the granite. The silver burned her wrists. The iron was just as cold as the stone. She could already feel the temperature seeping into her bones, stealing the warmth from her blood. Garrett. She tried one last time. Her voice was hoarse from screaming earlier, from begging, from crying. "Please, I know you're scared, but this is wrong. You know it's wrong." He finished tightening the last bolt. For a moment, he stayed bent over her, his face close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. The shame. But shame wasn't enough to make him brave. Shame never was. "I'm sorry," he whispered so quietly only she could hear. "But I have a family to think about. A position to protect. Oh, I can't." He straightened abruptly, not finishing the sentence. Couldn't even give her the courtesy of a complete explanation. Then he walked away without looking back. Magnus stepped forward, raised his hands for silence. The crowd quieted. 200 faces, illuminated by flickering torchlight. 200 pairs of eyes watching her die. "Tonight we cleanse our sins," Magnus intoned. "We offer this girl, Thalin Graves, to the spirit of the forbidden woods. May her blood wash away our misfortune. May the cursed wolf take her and leave us in peace." "Take her," the crowd chanted. "Take her, take her." The words echoed off the trees, off the mountains, off the stone beneath her back. "Take her, take her." As if she wasn't even human. As if she was just meat to be consumed. Then Magnus gave the order. "Leave her." The torches turned away. One by one, the flames retreated back toward the pack house, toward safety and warmth and life. Serafina was the last to leave. She walked up to the altar, leaned in close enough that only Thalin could hear her whisper, "I hope it hurts. I hope he tears you apart slowly. That's what you get for existing, you filth. For daring to look at Garrett like you had any right. For breathing the same air as your betters." Then she too was gone, and Thalin was alone. The silence was worse than the chanting had been. In the silence, she could hear everything. The wind through the trees, a howl that sounded almost alive, the creak of branches bending under snow, the frantic hammering of her own heart, the silence of a world that didn't care if she lived or died. And the cold. God, the cold. People who don't live in the mountains don't understand what cold like this means. -12 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill factor, pushing it down toward -25. At these temperatures, exposed skin begins to freeze within 5 minutes. Frostbite sets in within 10. Hypothermia. The slow shutting down of all your body's systems begins within 15. Thalin had been raised in these mountains. She knew what was happening to her body even as it happened. Knew each stage, each symptom, each step on the path to death. The first 3 minutes were the worst. The shivering was so violent, it felt like convulsions, her whole body trying desperately to generate heat. Her teeth chattered so hard, she bit her tongue, tasted blood. Her fingers and toes were already numb, the capillaries in her extremities constricting to keep blood flowing to her vital organs. She prayed, not to the goddess who'd apparently abandoned her, not to the ancestors resting in burial grounds Magnus planned to desecrate. She prayed to her parents dead these 10 years. Prayed that wherever they were, they couldn't see this. Couldn't see what their daughter had become, what the pack they died serving had done to her. Minutes 4 through 7 brought a strange sort of calm. The shivering began to slow. Her heart rate dropped. The pain in her hands and feet faded to a distant ache. This was her body giving up, she knew, conserving what little heat remained for the core, for the heart and lungs and brain. Everything else could freeze. Everything else was expendable. By minute 8, she'd stopped shivering entirely. Stage 2, hypothermia. Core temperature dropping below 95 degrees. Confusion setting in, thoughts becoming syrupy and slow. Her lips were probably blue by now, her skin mottled and pale. The hallucinations started around minute 10. She saw her mother standing at the edge of the woods beckoning. Saw her father sitting beside the altar, holding her hand that she could no longer feel. Heard voices that weren't there singing songs from her childhood. Her mother humming while she cooked. Her father laughing at dinner. Memories surfacing as her brain began to shut down, trying to comfort her in the end. By minute 12, she was barely conscious. Her heart rate had dropped to 40 beats per minute. Her breathing was shallow, barely moving her chest. The cold had stopped feeling cold. Everything just felt distant, like she was floating somewhere above her body, watching it shut down with detached curiosity. This was it then. This was how Thailing Graves died. Not with dignity, not with purpose. Just alone on a stone in the dark, sacrificed to a myth by people who'd never cared if she lived or died. She closed her eyes, waited for the final shutting down, the last beat of her heart. And that's when she heard it. A sound, not the wind, not a hallucination. A real sound coming from the dark wall of the forest. Heavy, deliberate, the crack of a branch under significant weight. Her eyes snapped open, or tried to. Her eyelids were sluggish, heavy, reluctant to obey. She could only stare up at the stars and wait, her vision tunneling the edges, going dark. Then they appeared, two orbs of light in the darkness, glowing, an unusual violet shade she'd never seen in nature, moving closer with predatory grace. A growl rumbled through the ground so deep and resonant, it vibrated the stone beneath her. It wasn't the growl of a normal wolf. It sounded like the earth itself, grinding its teeth, like thunder given voice, like power barely contained. The cursed wolf. It was real. It was here. And she was about to die, not from cold, but from teeth and claws torn apart in the dark by a creature from nightmares. Please, she tried to whisper, but her voice was gone. Her lips wouldn't move. The cold had stolen even this from her, the ability to beg for mercy at the end. A shadow detached itself from the trees, massive, impossible. A wolf that stood nearly as tall as a horse at the shoulder, its fur so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle, silver lines of old violence. This was an animal that had survived battles that should have killed it. This was a predator at the apex of the food chain. The wolf approached slowly, each massive paw silent on the snow despite its size. It lowered its head, sniffing the air around her, scenting her blood where she'd bitten her tongue, scenting her fear, scenting her death. Thailin tried to close her eyes. If she was going to be eaten, she didn't want to see it coming. But even her eyelids wouldn't obey anymore. She could only watch as the massive head came closer until she could feel hot breath against her frozen neck. The wolf huffed, a sound of confusion, displeasure. Then it did something Thailin's dying brain couldn't process. It shifted. The sound of bones cracking filled the clearing. Not the crack of bones breaking under teeth, but the wet, organic sound of a body changing shape, restructuring. The wolf's form, blurred, contorted muscles and fur rearranging themselves into something else entirely. And then there was a man standing where the wolf had been. Not just a man, something more, something other. He was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, his body all corded muscle and barely contained power. Scars covered his torso, the same silver lines the wolf had borne, creating a map of violence, survived. His hair was long and wild, black as ink, and falling past his shoulders, and his eyes, those impossible eyes, were still that violet shade, glowing faintly in the darkness like embers. He reached out one large hand and touched the iron shackle on her wrist, looked at the chain, then back at her face. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. Like he didn't use it often, like human speech was a language he'd half forgotten. Who chained you to my boundary stone, little one? Thailin's mind couldn't make sense of it. The cursed wolf was a man, was speaking, was asking questions. This wasn't how the story went. This wasn't how she was supposed to die. Speak, he commanded, though his tone wasn't angry at her. It was angry for her. A distinction that somehow mattered even as she was dying. Who offers a living soul to a man they claim is dead? She tried to answer, tried to form words, but her core temperature was too low, her body too far into shutdown. All she managed was a broken whisper, forcing the name past frozen lips. Magnus, Thornfield. The man's unusual eyes narrowed to slits. His entire body went still in a way that was more terrifying than any snarl. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade's worth of rage. Magnus, He still lives, and he sends me a woman to do his dirty work. He grabbed the iron chain with one hand, his muscles bunched beneath scarred skin, power coiling like a spring. Then, with a roar of exertion that shook snow from the surrounding trees and sent a flock of ravens screaming into the night sky, he pulled. The chain didn't just break, it shattered. Links exploded like glass metal, shrieking as molecular bonds came apart under impossible force. The sound echoed through the forest, a declaration of violence and power that would carry for miles. Thailin fell forward, her frozen body unable to catch itself. But the man caught her easily, scooping her up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. His skin was incredibly hot against her frozen flesh, not fever hot, but furnace hot. The natural heat of a shifter whose metabolism ran far hotter than any human could survive. "I am no cursed little one," he said, turning back toward the dark forest, with her cradled against his chest. "And Magnus has made a grave error tonight. He thought he was feeding a beast. Instead, he just gave me the one thing I needed to take back my kingdom." Thailin tried to ask what he meant, but darkness was pulling at her vision, the hypothermia and shock finally dragging her under. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the man's voice, softer now, almost gentle. "Sleep, you're safe now. And when you wake, little one, we're going to burn their world down." Then there were nothing but warmth and dark and the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Thailin woke to warmth, not the aggressive heat of a fever or the stifling closeness of too many blankets, but a steady encompassing warmth that seemed to seep into her bones, chasing away the memory of cold that had nearly killed her. For a moment, she didn't open her eyes. Didn't want to, because if she opened them and found herself back in the pack house basement, if this warmth turned out to be a dying hallucination, she thought she might shatter completely. But the smells were wrong for the basement. Instead of mildew and stone, she smelled cedar wood and something cooking real food, meat roasting over fire, not the thin gruel she usually got as her one meal a day. And beneath those scents, something else. Pine and winter storm and wild spaces. The smell of a shifter who spent more time in fur than skin. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was rough-hewn timber, massive logs, fitted together with craftsmanship that spoke of age and permanence. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in flames, painting dancing shadows across walls lined with books, maps, and weapons. The bed she lay in, and it was a bed, a real bed with furs and quilts and a mattress that didn't have springs digging into her back, was enormous. This wasn't the pack house. This wasn't any way she'd ever been. Thailin sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. Her hands and feet were wrapped in clean white bandages that smelled of healing herbs, comfrey and arnica and something else she couldn't identify. An IV line ran from her arm to a bag of clear fluid, hanging from a makeshift stand fashioned from wood and copper wire. Someone had dressed her in soft flannel pajamas that were miles too big, the sleeves falling past her hands, the pants pooling around her feet. "Don't move too quickly. Your core temperature dropped to 89 degrees. You were 3 degrees away from cardiac arrest." The voice came from across the room. Thaylin's head snapped toward it too fast, the room spinning, and she saw him. The man from the forest, the cursed wolf, the impossible creature that was supposed to be a mindless demon but had spoken to her, saved her, carried her away from death. In the firelight, he looked almost human. Almost. But there was something in the way he held himself, in the predatory stillness of his body, in those striking eyes that marked him as other, as more. He was stood by the hearth, tending to something in a cast iron pot. He'd dressed since she'd last seen him. Black cargo pants, a grey thermal shirt that strained across shoulders, built for violence. His long black hair was tied back, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face and the jagged scar that ran from temple to jaw. In the daylight, if it was day, she couldn't tell without windows. He looked somewhere in his early 30s, old for an unmated wolf, ancient for one living alone in the wilderness. "Where am I?" Thailin's voice came out as a rasp, her throat raw from screaming from cold, from nearly dying. My home, 3 miles northwest of the altar of atonement, deep enough in the forbidden woods that your former pack won't find you unless I want them to. He ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl, which I don't. Not yet. Former pack. The words landed heavy. She was packless now. Rogue. In wolf society, being packless was worse than being dead. It meant no protection, no community, no connection to the spiritual bonds that made shifters more than just animals wearing human skin. It meant being prey. But somehow, sitting here in this stranger's cabin with bandages on her frost-bitten hands, Thailin couldn't bring herself to care about pack bonds. The pack had chained her to a stone and left her to die. Whatever bond had existed was broken the moment Magnus gave that order. The man crossed the room and handed her the bowl. Broth, venison bone marrow healing herbs. You were bordering on organ failure from hypothermia. If I hadn't found you when I did. He stopped. Something flickered across his face. Rage barely contained. Drink! Thailin took the bowl with trembling hands. The first sip was heaven-rich and savory, the best thing she'd tasted in years. Maybe ever. She'd been so used to thin soup and stale bread, to eating after everyone else had taken their fill, to going hungry more often than not. This was real food, the kind that reminded you that living could be good. She drank slowly, letting the warmth spread through her from the inside out. The man pulled a heavy wooden chair close to the bed and sat watching her with those unsettling eyes. "My name is Caspian," he said quietly. "Caspian Blackwood. And I am not cursed, despite what Magnus tells his sheep." Blackwood. Thailin's mind raced through pack history lessons she'd half forgotten taught in the schoolroom before her parents died. The Blackwood line had ruled Moonstone Ridge for 200 years before Magnus took power. They'd been strong Alpha's fair leaders, respected throughout the territory. But the last Blackwood Alpha had gone mad during his ascension ceremony, had slaughtered the council, had fled into the wilderness to become the demon that now haunted the Forbidden Zone. Or so the story went. Looking at the man in front of her at Caspian, Thailin saw clarity in those strange eyes. Intelligence, control. This wasn't a creature driven mad by power. This was something else entirely. "You're the Alpha that Magnus replaced," she said slowly, pieces falling into place. 10 years ago, they said you died, said you went mad and killed the council before running into the woods. They said I went mad and ran." Caspian's voice was flat and emotionless, in the way of people who'd learned to bury their pain so deep it couldn't hurt them anymore. Close enough to death for their purposes. But I survived. I've survived out here for a decade watching Magnus destroy everything my family built, and I couldn't do anything about it. Couldn't challenge him. Couldn't reclaim my throne. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Pack law is absolute, Thailin. An Alpha draws power from his pack, from the bonds that tie him to his wolves, to the land, to the ancestors. When Magnus poisoned me, when he severed my connection to Moonstone Ridge, I became a rogue, and a rogue cannot challenge for Alpha position. The pack bond won't recognize him. The goddess herself would reject the claim." "But then how?" Thailin stopped, remembered what he'd said in the forest about Magnus giving him the one thing he needed. Caspian smiled. It was not a kind expression. Magnus performed a blood sacrifice ritual. Ancient magic, forbidden magic technically, though that hasn't stopped wolves from using it when desperate. When he chained you to my boundary stone and offered you to the cursed wolf, he invoked the old laws. Laws that supersede even pack bonds. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he touched her wrist gently, just above the bandages. His fingers were warm, calloused, careful. "The ritual transferred your bond from Moonstone Ridge to me. You are no longer part of Magnus's pack, Thailin. You are the first member of mine. And through you, through your blood, your spirit, your connection to the land, I can feel the pack territory again. Faint, distant, but there." Magnus thought he was disposing of trash. Instead, he handed me the key to the back door. Thaylin stared at him. At this stranger who'd saved her life, who spoke of rituals and bonds and reclaiming kingdoms. None of this made sense. She was nothing. She'd been nothing for 10 years. How could she possibly be the key to anything? I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? There are 200 wolves in Moonstone Ridge. Why choose me for the sacrifice? Something dark crossed Caspian's face. He stood abruptly, walking to a wall covered by an old tattered tapestry. With one sharp movement, he pulled it aside, revealing what it had hidden. Photographs, dozens of them pinned to the wooden planks. Some were yellowed with age, others more recent. But they all showed the same thing: people, pack members. And in the center, one photo larger than the rest, showing a man and woman in formal dress, their arms around a teenage girl with light hair and a shy smile. Thaylin's breath stopped. She knew those people. Knew them in the way you know your own face in a mirror, in the way you know the shape of your mother's hands or the sound of your father's laugh. Samuel and Marie Graves, Caspian said quietly. My father's Gamma, third in command of Moonstone Ridge, loyal to the Blackwood line for 3 generations. They died 10 years ago, the same night I was poisoned and thrown into Devil's Gorge. No, that couldn't be right. Her parents had died in a car accident, brake failure on a mountain road. Tragic, but not suspicious. Everyone had said so. Magnus himself had presided over their funeral, had spoken of their service with tears in his eyes. They were murdered, Thaylin, by Magnus, because they discovered what he was planning. Caspian turned to face her, and the rage in his unusual eyes was a living thing. Your parents were investigating irregularities in the pack, finances, land sales that didn't add up, resources disappearing. They brought their concerns to me the day before my ascension ceremony. Told me they thought someone was stealing from the pack. Told me they were close to proving it. He crossed back to her, pulled a worn leather journal from his pocket, and handed it to her. I found this in the wreckage of your parents' car. I snuck back to pack territory 6 months after my supposed death, wanted to see what Magnus had done with their belongings. He'd burned most of it, but this survived. It was hidden under the passenger seat, must have fallen there before the crash. Thaylin's hands shook as she opened the journal. Her mother's handwriting covered the pages, neat, precise, lists of transactions, dates, mounts, and on the last page, written in her mother's careful script, evidence compiled, Magnus Thornfield has embezzled $4.2 million over 3 years through false land sales and supply contract fraud. Must tell Alpha Caspian before ascension ceremony tomorrow. If anything happens to Samuel and me, protect Thaylin. She carries the celestial bloodline through my grandmother's line. Magnus must never know. He would kill her to prevent. The entry ended there, mid-sentence, as if her mother had been interrupted, as if someone had come through the door and Marie had shoved the journal into her bag, never to write another word. The brake lines were cut, Caspian said softly. I examined the wreckage myself. It was made to look like mechanical failure, but I know sabotage when I see it. The cuts were clean, precise, professional. Magnus killed your parents to silence them. Then he poisoned me at my ascension ceremony to take the throne, and he kept you, their daughter, the last living Graves, as his servant, his slave, right under everyone's noses where he could watch you, control you, make sure you never became a threat. Thaylin couldn't breathe. The room was spinning again, but not from hypothermia. From the weight of truth she'd been too young to understand 10 years ago. She'd been 13 when her parents died. 13 when Magnus had taken her in, given her a place to sleep and food to eat in exchange for service. She thought she was lucky, thought the Alpha was being generous to an orphan. But he'd killed them. He'd murdered her parents and then kept her close, kept her broken and starving and small so she could never become a threat. Never ask questions, never discover what her mother had been trying to tell Alpha Caspian on that last day. What did she mean? Thaylin's voice was hollow, her hands still gripping the journal. At the end, She carries the celestial bloodline. What does that mean? What was my mother trying to say? Caspian was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat back down, leaning forward so their eyes were level. Your mother was a historian. She studied bloodlines, traced family trees back centuries. It was her passion, understanding where wolves came from, how the old powers passed down through generations. He paused, choosing his words carefully. 3 months before she died, she came to me, told me she discovered something in the archives, something about your family line that went back farther than anyone realized. He reached into his pocket again, pulled out a folded piece of paper worn soft with age, and handed it to her. Thalin unfolded it with numb fingers. It was a family tree, the graves line going back 12 generations, but one branch was highlighted in her mother's red ink, traced backward past the Samuel, past his parents, past 6 more generations, until it reached a name that made Thalin's blood run cold. Lyanna Graves née Silverlight. Born 1823, died 1901, known as the White Wolf of the Rockies, and beside her name in her mother's careful handwriting, Celestial Bloodline, dormant but present in all female descendants. Thalin must be protected. You're not just a wolf, Thalin, Caspian said quietly. You carry one of the oldest, rarest bloodlines in our species. White wolves appear once every century, maybe less. They're healers, protectors, living avatars of divine will, the embodiment of justice. Magnus didn't know your mother kept it secret, knew it would be dangerous if anyone discovered what you were. But she wanted to tell me, wanted me to understand what we had in the pack, what we needed to protect. He took the paper back, gently refolded it. That's why Magnus kept you starving, Thalin. Malnutrition suppresses the wolf, keeps it dormant. A shifter can't access their wolf if their body doesn't have the resources to support the transformation. He couldn't kill you outright. Too many people remembered your parents, too many would ask questions. But he could make sure you never shifted, never discovered your power. And when you became too old, when people might start wondering why you'd never presented as Omega or Beta or anything, well, then you became convenient. A sacrifice no one would mourn. Thalin looked down at her bandaged hands, at the IV line feeding fluids into her dehydrated body, at the frostbite damage that would probably leave scars. She thought about 10 years of scrubbing floors and being invisible and swallowing every hurt until she felt like she might drown in them. And she thought about her parents, about her mother's careful documentation and her father's loyalty and how they died trying to protect the pack, trying to stop a thief and a murderer who'd stolen not just money, but an entire future. Something hot and sharp kindled in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something fiercer, something with teeth. You said you needed me to take back your kingdom, she said slowly, her voice gaining strength. What did you mean? Caspian smiled. And this time there was nothing cold about it. This time it was the smile of a predator who just scented prey after a long, hungry winter. I meant that together, little one, we're going to make Magnus Thornfield pay for every drop of blood he's spilled, every life he's destroyed. Every year he's worn a crown that was ever his. He has stood, offered her his hand. But first I'm going to teach you how to stop being a victim, how to find your wolf, how to become the weapon Magnus should have feared from the beginning. Thalin stared at that outstretched hand. She could refuse, could ask him to take her to another pack somewhere far from Colorado, and Magnus, and the nightmare her life had become. She could disappear, start over, try to forget, but forgetting wouldn't bring her parents justice, wouldn't save the pack from a corrupt alpha. Wouldn't stop Magnus from selling the sacred burial grounds. She remembered now the phone call. She'd overheard the mining deal, the $50 million. She took Caspian's hand. His grip was warm, strong, steady. When do we start? She asked. Now. The training began slowly, necessarily so. Thalin's body had been through too much trauma to push hard immediately. The first 3 days were critical recovery. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to stabilize after coming so close to death. Caspian monitored all her vitals obsessively, checking her fingers and toes for signs of tissue death, adjusting her IV fluids, making her drink what felt like gallons of healing tea that tasted like grass and determination. He changed her bandages twice daily, applying fresh herbs and salves. The frostbite on her fingers and toes was healing, but slowly. The tissue had gone white, then purple, then a mottled red as circulation returned. She would keep all her digits, a minor miracle, given how long she'd been exposed, but the nerve damage would leave them sensitive to cold for the rest of her life. On the fourth day, Thaleen finally stayed conscious for more than a few hours at a time. Caspian brought her breakfast, actual breakfast, not thin gruel, and watched with satisfaction as she ate 3 eggs, 2 pieces of venison sausage, and an entire slice of bread with butter. "You were malnourished," he explained, sitting across from her at the small table. "Severely. Your body mass index is 16.2. Healthy range for a female wolf your age is 20 to 25. You're missing muscle mass, bone density. Your organs were starting to cannibalize themselves for energy." Thaleen pushed eggs around her plate, shame heating her cheeks. The pack had limited resources. It made sense that I ate less than the warriors. The pack had plenty of resources for Magnus to embezzle millions, plenty for Serafina to buy designer clothes, plenty for feasts every full moon. Caspian's voice was flat matter of fact. "You were starved deliberately, Thaleen. It wasn't about resources. It was about keeping you weak. Eat." She ate, and on the 5th day, when the bandages came off and her hands had healed to pink tender skin, when she could walk without her feet screaming in protest, Caspian took her outside. The cabin was deep in old-growth forest, surrounded by pines that had probably been standing for 200 years. Snow covered everything in pristine white, broken only by animal tracks and the thin column of smoke rising from the chimney. It was beautiful, isolated, safe. "Tell me what you know about shifting," Caspian said, standing in the clearing behind the cabin. "I've never shifted." Thaleen admitted, her breath misting in the cold air. "Never felt the wolf. I always thought I was broken. That maybe my parents had been human-born and I didn't inherit the gene properly." "You're not broken. Your wolf is there, she's just been sleeping." He began to pace, leaving footprints in the snow. Shifting is about connection. Between human and wolf, between body and spirit, between your conscious mind and the instincts buried in your DNA. Most young wolves shift for the first time during puberty, triggered by strong emotion. Fear, anger, joy. The wolf surges forward to protect you, to express what you're feeling too intensely to contain. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. "You've been suppressed for 10 years. Emotions beaten down, instincts denied, body too weak to support the shift. We need to wake her up, and that starts with giving you something she's been denied all this time." "What's that?" "Safety is strength, the space to be angry." For the next 7 days, what Caspian called week 1, they worked on the physical foundation. He had Thaleen run through the forest, first for 10 minutes, then 20, then an hour. She collapsed after that first 10 minutes, gasping, her legs shaking. But Caspian was there, not coddling her, not making it easy, but not abandoning her either. Again, he'd say when she fell, "Your wolf won't accept a weak vessel. Show her your worth inhabiting." And Thaleen, who'd spent 10 years making herself small and quiet and invisible, found something she thought Magnus had beaten out of her completely. She found stubbornness, found pride, found the will to get up one more time, to push one more mile, to prove that she was not in fact broken beyond repair. He had her climb trees, ford icy streams, track animal prints in the snow. Every time she wanted to stop, wanted to collapse and give up, Caspian pushed, not cruelly, but relentlessly, like someone who understood that 10 years of damage wouldn't be undone in 10 days. By day 7, Thaleen could run for 90 minutes without stopping, could scale a 30-foot pine and back down again, could track a deer through fresh snow by scent and sign. Her body was changing, muscles developing, her hollowed cheeks filling out, her skin taking on the healthy glow of someone who ate 3 meals a day and slept in a warm bed. On day 8, they began combat training. "Wolves fight on instinct," Caspian explained, circling her in the clearing. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines. But instinct without technique is just flailing. I'm going to teach you how to read an opponent, how to use your size or lack of it as an advantage, how to turn defense into offense. He moved so fast she almost didn't see it. 1 second, he was 3 feet away. The next, his hand was coming toward her face. Thailin flinched, stumbled backward, fell on her ass in the snow. Caspian shook his head. What did you do wrong? I wasn't fast enough. You froze. Your brain saw the threat, panicked, and shut down. That's the response of prey, Thailin. We need to rewire you to respond like a predator. He offered her a hand up. Again. And this time don't think. React. They drilled for hours. By the end of the first day, Thailin had bruises forming on her arms and legs from where Caspian had pulled his punches at the last second. By the end of the second day, she'd managed to block 1 strike out of every 5. By day 14, she'd actually landed a solid punch to his shoulder that wouldn't have deterred a determined house cat. But it was progress. And through it all, Caspian never once made her feel inadequate. Never compared her to the warriors who trained their whole lives. Never implied she was wasting his time. He was patient, methodical, the kind of teacher who understood that 10 years of damage wouldn't be undone in 2 weeks. But he was also preparing her for something specific. Thailin could feel it in the way he designed the drills and the skills he emphasized. This wasn't just about self-defense. This was about combat, about facing enemies, about surviving whatever came next. Week 2 brought a different kind of training. On day 8, after their usual combat drills, Caspian sat her down by the fire. Your wolf is close now, he said, studying her face. I can smell her. She's been waking up as your body gets stronger. Soon she'll try to emerge on her own. We need to prepare for that. How? Thailin asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. By giving her a reason to come forward, by creating the conditions for a safe first shift. He poured tea into 2 cups, handed her one. For most wolves, the first shift is traumatic. Bones breaking and reforming skin, stretching the overwhelming flood of new senses. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you meet her halfway, if you invite her forward instead of fighting her, the transition can be not easy, but easier. Over the next several days, Caspian taught her meditation techniques. How to sink into that quiet space behind her thoughts. How to listen to the instincts that whispered at the edges of her consciousness. How to recognize the wolf's presence when she stirred. On day 15, Thailin felt it for the first time. A flutter in her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. A sense of something other living just beneath her skin, waiting, watching, patient. She's there, Thailin whispered, opening her eyes to find Caspian watching her intently. I can feel her. Good, he said. Tomorrow, we'll try to bring her forward. But the wolf had other plans. That night, Thailin dreamed. Not the pleasant dreams of the past few weeks, but nightmares. She was 13 again, sitting in Elder Harding's office while he told her that her parents were dead. Accident on the mountain road. So sorry for your loss. Here are their effects. A box of belongings. A lifetime reduced to objects. Then she was standing over 2 graves freshly dug. Magnus's hand heavy on her shoulder. Don't worry, child. We'll take care of you. The promise of a snake. Then she was in the basement scrubbing floors while Serafina kicked over the water. Again and again and again. 10 years condensed into a repeating loop of cruelty. And then, and this was new, something in her unconscious mind had never conjured before. She was watching the accident happen. Watching her parents' car careen off the mountain road. Brake lines cut Magnus standing in the trees above with a satisfied smile. The rage that surged through her was volcanic, primal, pure, and her wolf, dormant for 23 years, starved and suppressed and denied, erupted. Thailin woke to the sound of splintering wood. She was on the floor of the cabin on all fours, but her hands weren't hands anymore. They were paws, white paws, pure luminous white like snow on a sunny day, like moonlight given form. Caspian was there instantly, in wolf form himself. his massive black wolf dwarfing her white one. But he wasn't attacking, wasn't restraining. He was kneeling. His black wolf had dropped to his chest, head bowed in a posture of submission that made no sense. Alphas didn't submit. Then his voice echoed in her mind, the mind link that connected pack members that she'd never experienced before, that now felt as natural as breathing. Thaylin, can you hear me? She tried to answer, found that she could. Not with words exactly, but with thoughts that carried meaning. Yes, what happened? Why are you? Look at yourself. She looked down, saw white fur that seemed to generate its own light, saw paws that left faint glowing prints on the wooden floor, felt power humming through her veins like electricity. White wolf. Caspian breathed his mental voice thick with awe. The legends speak of them, bringers of justice, the pure ones, living avatars of divine will. He raised his head slowly, those violet eyes meeting hers. You're magnificent, Thaylin. And Magnus Thornfield is about to learn what happens when you try to bury something sacred. They ran that day, deep into the forest, further than Thaylin had ever gone, to places where human feet had never stepped and even wolf packs rarely ventured. They ran for hours until her wolf form felt as natural as her human skin, until she could shift between them with barely a thought, until the line between Thaylin Graves, the servant, and Thaylin Graves, the white wolf, blurred into something whole. Her wolf was smaller than Caspian's, yes, but she was faster, more agile, and she carried something his black wolf didn't, a presence that made other creatures fall silent as she passed. Birds stopped singing. Deer froze mid-step. Even a bear, glimpsed at a distance, turned and lumbered away rather than risk confrontation. Celestial bloodline. She understood now what that meant. It wasn't just power, it was authority. The kind that transcended pack bonds and individual strength. The kind that came from something older and deeper than wolf politics. When they returned to the cabin that evening, both exhausted and exhilarated, Caspian laid out supplies on the table. Paper, maps, photos. You shifted, he said, his voice carrying satisfaction and something else. Pride maybe. Ahead of schedule, which means we need to accelerate our timeline. There's something I haven't told you yet. Something I learned 2 days ago. He unfolded a printed email, slid it across the table to her. Thaylin read, her stomach sinking with every line. It was from Magnus's email account to someone at Redstone Mining Corporation. The content was brief, clinical, the language of business deals and betrayals dressed up in corporate speak. Contract finalized. Signing ceremony scheduled for Winter Solstice Gala, December 21st, 8 p.m. Wire transfer of 50 meloes to account number 44287719, Sayman. Upon signature. Excavation rights transfer immediately. Current pack members unaware of terms. Recommend media blackout for first 6 months of operations to avoid protests. Thaylin looked at the date. Today was December 18th. The gala was in 3 days. 72 hours until Magnus sold 12 generations of pack history to be strip-mined for lithium. He's really doing it, she whispered. He's really going to destroy everything. He's going to try. Caspian's voice was hard. But he's making one critical error. He's having the signing at the Winter Gala, the biggest pack event of the year. Every neighboring alpha will be there. The elders. Human press covering the cultural celebration. 300 witnesses to what he thinks will be his crowning achievement. His unusual eyes met hers, and she saw the plan forming. He's building us a stage, Thaylin. He's assembling an audience. All we have to do is show up and perform. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Days 17 and 18 of Thaylin's recovery were spent not on physical training, but on strategy and intelligence gathering. Caspian had resources Thaylin hadn't expected. A laptop hidden in a trunk connected to the internet via satellite. Contacts in neighboring packs who owed him favors. Eyes in the human towns who could gather information without being connected to Moonstone Ridge. How do you have all this? Thylin asked on day 19, watching him video chat with someone who was apparently a member of the Iron Creek Pack 60 miles south. 10 years is a long time, Caspian said simply. I may have been exiled from my pack, but I wasn't idle. I helped other packs with problems, trained their warriors, tracked rogues, mediated disputes. I built a network, Thylin, because I knew that one day I'd need allies. He ended the call, turned to face her. And now we're going to call in those deaths. On day 20, they got confirmation. The Iron Creek Alpha would attend the gala. So would the Silver Ridge Alpha and the Mountain Shadow Alpha. 3 of the 5 most powerful packs in Colorado, all present to witness whatever happened. They know something's wrong, Caspian explained. Moonstone Ridge's decline hasn't gone unnoticed. The neighboring alphas have been waiting for someone to challenge Magnus. They just couldn't do it themselves, inter-pack politics. But if someone from within Moonstone Ridge challenges, if that someone has legitimate claim, they'll support it. And they'll recognize you, Thylin asked. After 10 years, they'll recognize me. We grew up together, these alphas and I. Trained together, we have history. He smiled grimly. And they'll recognize you too, once they see what you are. No wolf can ignore a white wolf. It's genetically impossible. Your very presence demands acknowledgement. On day 21, they finalized the plan. It was simple really. Elegant in its directness. They would infiltrate the gala under false names. Thylin would expose Magnus's crimes publicly before witnesses. She would challenge him according to traditional law. And she would win. What about me? Caspian asked when they'd gone through the plan for the 3rd time. What's my role in this? Thylin looked at him. At this man who'd saved her life, trained her, believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Who'd spent 10 years in exile waiting for a chance at justice. You're my witness, she said. My proof that Magnus's story about the Mad Alpha was a lie. But this is my fight, Caspian. Magnus killed my parents, enslaved me for 10 years, tried to murder me. I need to be the one who brings him down. She expected him to argue. Expected him to insist that as the rightful alpha, he should be the one to challenge. But Caspian just nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Good, he said, because revenge taken by someone else is just revenge. Revenge you earn yourself, that's justice. That evening, Caspian produced clothing Thylin couldn't believe he owned. A silver gown that looked like it cost more than the pack house, elegant and flowing. A suit for himself that must have been custom made decades ago. Both had been stored in a waterproof trunk preserved against time and decay. My mother's, he said, holding up the dress. She was about your size. Would have been honored to see it worn by a white wolf. Thylin took the gown with trembling hands. It was beautiful, the kind of thing she'd never imagined wearing. The kind of thing that transformed a person from servant to queen. Try it on, Caspian said. We need to make sure it fits. She did, and when she emerged from the cabin's small bathroom, Caspian's expression told her everything she needed to know. They won't recognize you, he said quietly. You look nothing like the girl they left to die. You look like what you are. Powerful, dangerous, divine. On day 22, Caspian received the final piece of intelligence they needed. A contact in Moonstone Ridge, a servant who'd secretly opposed Magnus for years, sent word that the gala preparations were complete. The contract would be signed at 8:15 p.m. Magnus would make a speech and security would be tight but not impossible. There's a service entrance, the message read. Kitchen staff back of the building. Guards won't check IDs, they're too chaotic. 11 guests confirmed sick with flu won't attend. Use names Asher Blackwell and Thylin Gray added to backup investor list. Caspian had hacked the guest list days ago, adding their aliases. But having inside confirmation made the plan real, final, inescapable. That night, Thylin couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything that could go wrong. They could be recognized at the door. The plan could fail. Magnus could kill them both before they ever got to speak. But then she thought about her parents, about 10 years of slavery, about all the wolves suffering under Magnus's corrupt rule, about the sacred burial grounds that would be destroyed if she did nothing. And she thought about her white wolf waiting beneath her skin, ready to emerge and show Magnus exactly what kind of monster he'd created when he tried to bury justice itself. On day 23, the day of the gala, Thailin woke to find Caspian already dressed in his suit. He looked like the Alpha King he'd been born to be. Dangerous, regal, ready. Today, he said simply, today we take back everything they stole. Thailin dressed carefully. The silver gown fit perfectly, clinging to curves she'd only developed in the last 3 weeks. The diamonds Caspian had procured for her hair caught the light like stars. The mask required for the masquerade theme covered enough of her face to provide anonymity, but not so much that she couldn't be identified once she chose to reveal herself. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the servant girl who'd scrubbed floors and swallowed insults. This was someone who could walk into a room full of enemies and make them kneel. "Ready?" Caspian asked, offering his arm. Thailin took it, felt the strength there, the support, the decade of rage that matched her own. "Let's go end this," she said. The Winter Solstice Gala was the pinnacle of Moonstone Ridge's social calendar. Tonight, it would be the stage for Magnus Thornfield's greatest triumph or his complete destruction. The limousine pulled up at 7:45. Thailin stepped out first, letting the silver gown catch the light. She moved with the grace her white wolf had given her, fluid, confident, commanding. Caspian followed his presence, a wall of controlled violence at her back. At the entrance, Garrett Holloway checked names against his clipboard. His eyes swept over them, lingered on Thailin's face. Something flickered. Recognition trying to surface. But 3 weeks of proper nutrition and confidence had transformed her so completely that his mind refused to make the connection. Names: Lord Asher Blackwell and Lady Thailin Gray. Investors from Montana. Garrett checked his list, found the entry Caspian had added days ago and waved them through. But as Thailin passed, he caught her arm. "Have we met?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "I don't think so. I'm quite certain I'd remember you." He released her, frowning, and they slipped inside. The great hall had been transformed into a winter fantasy. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across walls draped in silk. 300 wolves, dressed in their finest, drank champagne, completely unaware their alpha was about to sell their souls. Magnus sprawled on a gilded throne at the hall's front, his face flushed with wine. Beside him, Serafina wore jewelry that had belonged to Caspian's mother, stolen from the Blackwood vaults. The lunar crescent necklace around her throat made Caspian's jaw tighten. "Steady," Thailin murmured. "We get it back, all of it." They moved through the crowd, accepting champagne, blending in. Thailin catalogued faces: the Iron Creek Alpha, the Silver Ridge Alpha, the Mountain Shadow Alpha, all present, all witnesses to what came next. At 8:10, Magnus stood and tapped his glass. Silence fell. "My friends," he began, voice oozing false warmth, "tonight I announce a partnership that will secure our future. Redstone Mining Corporation has offered us an unprecedented opportunity. I object." The voice cut through his speech like a blade, alpha command that made lesser wolves snap to attention. Every head turned. Thailin stepped forward, Caspian beside her. The crowd parted unconsciously, responding to authority they didn't understand but couldn't resist. Magnus went purple. "Who dares security remove?" "I dare." Thailin's voice rang clear. "I object to this farce, this betrayal, this mockery of everything Moonstone Ridge stands for." She climbed the dais steps with deliberate slowness. Let every eye track her movement. Caspian stayed one step behind, supporting but making clear this moment belonged to her. "Who are you?" Magnus sputtered. "Guards." 10 enforcers moved toward the stage. Caspian's posture shifted just slightly. Professional warriors recognized a predator. They hesitated. "My name," Thailin said, reaching for her mask, "is Thailin Graves." The mask fell. Recognition rippled through the crowd in waves. Pack members who'd never really seen her now stared in shock. Servants gasped. Elders pushed forward. Magnus went white. Impossible. You're dead. The cursed wolf. There is no cursed wolf. Thalin cut him off. Just a story you told to frighten children. She turned to address the crowd. 3 weeks ago, Alpha Magnus chained me to the altar of atonement and left me to die. He called it necessary, but there is no curse, only corruption, theft, murder. She's lying, Magnus roared. She's mad, guards, seize her. Has it? Caspian stepped forward, removing his own mask. If Thalin's reveal caused shock, his caused pandemonium. Elder Harding swayed hand to his chest. Alpha Caspian, goddess, you're alive. The name spread like wildfire. Caspian, Caspian Blackwood. The Alpha supposedly dead for 10 years. Now standing on Magnus's dais, very much alive, very much sane. Hello Magnus. Caspian's voice was soft cutting. It's been a long time. Magnus looked ready to vomit or bolt. His eyes darted toward exits, but Caspian had positioned himself between Magnus and escape. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for truth. You died, Magnus whispered. I watched you fall. The poison. I survived, barely. Caspian's voice dropped. The wolf's bane and silver nitrate nearly killed me. The fall should have finished it, but I'm harder to kill than you thought. He pulled out a document. This is your contract with Redstone Mining. Want to know what it really says? He read aloud, section by section. $50 million. Full excavation rights to the sacred burial grounds. Forced pack relocation. Corporate security removing anyone who refused. Gasps. Shouts. The crowd's mood shifted from confusion to fury. The sacred burial grounds weren't just land, they were holy ground. To sell them was sacrilege. That's fake, Magnus screamed, voice cracking. It has your signature, your email, your offshore account number. Caspian threw the contract at Magnus's feet. Pages fluttered down like damning snow. My father served you, Thalin said, voice cutting through chaos. Samuel Graves, your gamma. He discovered your embezzlement, so you killed him, cut their brake lines, made it look like an accident. She held up her mother's journal. My mother documented everything. $4.2 million stolen over 3 years. And when she was about to expose you, you murdered her. Murdered both of them. The journal joined the contract on the floor. Then you kept me as your servant, starved me, beat me, made sure I never shifted. Thalin's voice was steady now, because my mother had discovered something else. She traced my bloodline, found out what I carry in my DNA. And you couldn't risk anyone knowing. What bloodline? Someone called. Thalin looked at Caspian. He nodded. I am celestial bloodline, Thalin said quietly. Descended from Lyanna Silverlight the White Wolf. Magnus kept me starving because a malnourished wolf can't shift, can't become a threat. She smiled without kindness. But I'm not starving anymore. The shift was instantaneous. Woman became wolf in a flash of light. Pure white fur that glowed like moonlight-made flesh. Gold eyes holding divine fire. The effect was immediate. Every wolf in the great hall dropped to one knee. Instinct, genetic imperative, recognition of celestial bloodline, divine blood. Even Magnus fell to his knees, his body betraying him, forcing submission. Only Caspian remained standing. He bowed his head in respect. Thalin shifted back. Caspian threw his jacket around her shoulders. She stood breathing hard, letting them all see. This was what Magnus had tried to bury. You tried to kill me, she said to the kneeling Magnus. You murdered my parents. You stole a kingdom. You sold your pack's soul. Her voice rang with alpha command. Magnus Thornfield, by the right of blood and bone, by the authority of my bloodline, I challenge you for leadership of Moonstone Ridge Pack. Refuse and forfeit by cowardice. Accept and face judgment. Ancient law, a challenge from celestial bloodline, could not be declined without permanent loss of status. Magnus looked around wildly, at enforcers who wouldn't meet his eyes, at Serafina who'd gone pale, at exits blocked by Caspian and 300 witnesses. He was trapped. This is unlawful, Magnus croaked. She's rogue. She has every standing elder, Harding said, stepping forward. Celestial bloodline supersedes all pack law. If a white wolf challenges, the challenge must be met. Those are the oldest laws we have. He turned to the crowd, voice cracking. I have lived 83 years. I saw Magnus poison the wine at Caspian's ascension. I said nothing. I chose silence when I should have chosen courage. Tears ran down his weathered face. I failed Alpha Caspian. I failed Samuel and Marie Graves. I failed Thailin when she was chained to that stone and I turned away. But I will not fail again. The challenge is valid. Magnus must answer or forfeit everything. Magnus rose slowly. Pride or desperation made him accept. Fine. I'll tear your throat out, servant girl. Show them bloodline means nothing. He shifted. Large rusty brown wolf scarred from a decade of violence. Thailin shifted. White wolf glowing brighter in contrast, smaller but radiating power. The fight was not close. Magnus lunged, trying to overwhelm with size. Thailin sidestepped, raked claws along his flank. First blood. He spun, tried again. Same result. She was making him chase shadows, humiliating him before 300 witnesses. 5 minutes in, Magnus was panting, bleeding from a dozen cuts, movements sluggish. Thailin was barely winded. 10 minutes in, Magnus caught her shoulder with his teeth, drew blood. But Thailin used the grip against him, drove forward inside his guard, toppled him, using his momentum. A move Caspian had taught her for larger opponents. Her jaws locked around his throat, position for the killing blow. She held it until Magnus went limp in submission, until his wolf whined in defeat, until everyone understood she'd won, that she'd chosen mercy. Then she released him and stepped back. Thailin shifted to human form, walked to where Magnus lay, panting in wolf form. I could kill you, she said softly, by right of combat, but death is mercy, and you don't deserve mercy. She looked at Caspian. He nodded and stepped forward. By the authority vested in me as Alpha King of the Blackwood line, by the mandate of the goddess, as witnessed by her celestial avatar, I hereby strip Magnus Thornfield of all rank, all pack bonds, all protection under wolf law. He placed his hand on Magnus's head, then did something that shouldn't be possible but was for an Alpha King with a white wolf present. He severed Magnus's connection to his wolf. The sound Magnus made wasn't human or animal. It was the sound of something essential being ripped away. His body convulsed, and when it stilled, only a naked man remained sobbing on the floor. You are a rogue, Caspian pronounced. Packless, wolfless, stripped of everything. Any pack may kill you on sight. Run, Magnus, and pray I never hunt you. Two neighboring alphas dragged the weeping man toward the exit. No one tried to stop them. No one spoke in his defense. The throne was empty. Serafina tried to run. Thailin caught her arm. Please, Serafina whispered, terrified. I didn't know about the murders. You knew I was suffering, Thailin said coldly. Every time you kicked over my water, burned my clothes. You enjoyed it. Don't pretend ignorance now. She could banish her, send her into winter to die. The goddess knew she deserved it.
But I won't, Thailin said, because I'm not like you. You're going to stay, take my old position. Scrub floors, clean toilets, serve the pack you thought yourself above. You'll learn humility, and maybe in a few years, if you prove you've changed, I'll consider letting you be something more. But you'll have to earn it. Serafina was led away, sobbing. Garrett pushed through the crowd, fell to his knees. Thailin, goddess, I'm so sorry. I should have saved you. You could have, Thailin said quietly. You chose safety over courage. You chose your position over my life. Garrett was weeping. I know.
I'll do anything to make it right. Anything. You're stripped of beta rank, she said. That position requires courage you don't have. But you'll stay. You'll train our omegas in self-defense. Teach them they don't have to be victims. If you do this faithfully, maybe you'll become the man you should have been. Garrett nodded, accepting judgment. As he was led away, Caspian stepped to Thailin's side. He took her hand, raised it high. Moonstone Ridge Pack he said. 10 years ago, I was cast out by a traitor. I survived in exile watching as everything my family built was corrupted. I could not return. Pack law forbade it. He gestured to Thailin. But the goddess sent me this woman. She was offered as sacrifice, but became salvation. Through her courage, the door was opened for my return. He returned to face her. Luna Thailin Graves, celestial wolf, survivor of injustice. Will you stand with me as co-ruler? Will you bring justice and mercy in equal measure? Will you help me rebuild what was broken? Thailin gripped his hand, felt the pack bond solidify through their joint grip, the territory exhaling in relief. I will, she said. The crowd erupted in howls, the ancient song of recognition, of celebration. 300 voices in harmony shaking the rafters, declaring that Moonstone Ridge had been reborn. 1 week later, Thailin knelt at 2 graves in the sacred burial grounds. Samuel and Mary Graves, her parents. I did it, she whispered, placing wildflowers on each marker. I stopped him. I saved the pack. Her voice cracked. I just wish you were here to see it, to tell me if I'm doing this right, if you're proud. Caspian's hand touched her shoulder. They would be so proud. I knew your parents, Thailin. They were good wolves, honorable, kind, strong, and they would be incredibly proud of what you've become. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd become more than allies. The fated mate bond had deepened into something real. They would never have normal too much trauma, too much history. But they had each other. In the distance, the pack house bustled with activity. No more servants' quarters, no more hierarchy. The Omegas were being trained in self-defense. The elders were reviewing history. The warriors patrolled with renewed purpose. And in the basement where Thailin had spent 10 years, Serafina scrubbed floors under patient supervision, learning the dignity in honest work. The curse was broken. 3 pack members had announced pregnancies. The first children to be conceived in over a decade. New life, new hope. Come, Caspian said, offering his hand. Our people are waiting. Thailin took it and they walked toward the pack house, toward the future they would build together. Behind them, 12 generations of spirits watched over the territory and smiled. 3 months later, Thailin opened the doors to the Graves Memorial Center, the first Omega Resource Center in Pack territory, a place where the vulnerable could learn self-defense, access education, find dignity beyond what others said they deserved. Garrett ran the classes with dedication that bordered on obsessive. 3 months of service had changed him thinner, harder, more thoughtful. Serafina, after months of humility, was allowed to assist with children's programs. She approached the work carefully, understanding how fragile trust was. Elder Harding taught history, real history. Bitter told young wolves about the Blackwood Line, about corruption that nearly destroyed them all. He taught them to question authority, to verify claims, to never let fear silence them. And Thailin held clinic hours 3 days a week. Her white wolf had healing gifts, accelerated recovery, pain relief, the ability to sense illness. She treated broken bones and twisted ankles, but also deeper wounds. The trauma from Magnus's rule, the fear in Omega eyes, the mistrust that would take years to heal. The pack thrived. Fields were planted properly. Hunting parties brought back deer the herds had returned. Neighboring packs sent delegations to learn about the reforms. In spring, the first pup was born, a healthy boy who shifted within hours, his wolf form strong and perfect. The whole pack celebrated with genuine joy. That evening, Caspian found Thailin on the cabin porch where it had all begun. Her hand rested on her stomach where their own child grew still too early to announce but already loved. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how I was supposed to die 3 months ago," Thailin said softly. "How I thought I was nothing, nobody. How I believed every lie Magnus told me." She turned to him, eyes bright. "And about how wrong I was. I wasn't nothing. I was just sleeping, waiting for someone to believe in me enough that I could believe in myself." "You were never wrong," Caspian corrected. "You were lied to. There's a difference. You were always worth remembering, always worth fighting for. It just took you a while to see it." She leaned into his warmth, watching sunset. Paint the mountains gold and crimson. Somewhere in the forest, wolves were running their pack free and safe and whole. Elder Harding is documenting everything, Thalin said, writing it all down, making sure future generations know what happened, know what corruption looks like so they can stop it early. Good, Caspian said. History written by survivors is essential. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Magnus had just killed me quickly? Thalin asked. Every day, Caspian admitted, because if he'd killed you, I would have died in that forest. The pack would have collapsed. The burial grounds would have been destroyed. Everything would have been lost. He turned her face toward his. But he didn't. He tried to make you suffer. And that cruelty was his undoing. It gave me time to find you. It invoked laws older than his corruption. It awakened something he should have feared. A survivor, Thalin said quietly. A survivor, Caspian agreed. The most dangerous thing in the world. The girl who scrubbed floors thought she was powerless. She believed every lie about her worthlessness. But she was wrong. They tried to bury her. They didn't know she was a seed. And from that seed, a forest grew, one that would shelter generations yet to come. One that would never forget what it cost to plant the first tree. One that would always remember the deepest roots grow from the darkest soil, and the strongest trees rise from places where others thought nothing could survive. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it just needs time to grow.